We are here to pick up. There has been a little, let's just say a little action on the superhero nerd Marvel front since we've gotten together. That's been important. To wait until we're both caught up. Yeah. It's man, let's just say it's a whole multiverse of stuff to talk about. Gee, there's a reference. But yeah, we're gonna start today, see where it takes us too, because it's a fascinating it was a fascinating project to see done the way that they chose to do it. But we're talking about Marvel's Moon Knight, which is first of all, I thought was really interesting because I got turned on to Moon Knight several years ago, and it was actually because of the DID diagnosis or the dissociative identity disorder. I was talking to someone who had DID, and this was back when the movie Split came out. Yeah. If people are familiar,
I remember that one. Yeah,
the secret sequel to Unbreakable, and the second in the trilogy that turned into Glass. That we won't. That's people have feelings about that.
But, we can go down.
Yeah, exactly.
Put that on the to-do list, Dwight.
yes, we got to list that one. That'd be a good throwback to the trilogy. We but when I asked this individual, I said, so when you see that depicted, is that offensive? I was just curious, right? Because McAvoy's performance was really good, and I was at the time talking to someone tangentially about it for a movie podcast that a friend of mine was doing, and I decided to get that opinion. And this person just said, no, not at all. They said, I don't personally find that offensive. Also, there's a spoiler for Split. It kind of turns out that the person is not mentally ill. They actually are possessed by this other, whatever creature or something. Mm-hmm. So they actually have some superpowers that go along with it. And maybe they're not actually DID. Is what this, the person pointed out, and they said, but and once again, not representative. They said it certainly probably is very offensive to some people. They said the thing that bugged them though was that they weren't aware of. They basically said you don't see many other characters with DID unless they're scary or murderers. And then they mentioned that they felt a lot better about it because of Moon Knight, and I was like, oh, it's Moon Knight. Well, Marvel, blah, blah, blah. And so there we go. And it was around that time that for some reason, it seemed like a couple of different places that popped up, and all of a sudden Moon Knight's right in front of me. And I'm started asking people like, so which Moon Knight should I read to get, and so when this came out and they announced it, I was excited because I had already been turned on to Moon Knight for a little bit. What's your background with the character?
And this is the thing, the series that I got into was actually where it's the one that has to do with the West Coast Avengers and the schizophrenia diagnosis. Well, and since it's this idea that it's been a place where it's been like so many other Marvel things, there's variations, right? So you've got the possession by Khonshu, you've got these other things that go into mental health and have you question what reality is, which I also find really interesting when you're looking at anything that's done. Whether it's, like we're mentioning with the Unbreakable trilogy, or again, especially something in the Marvel universe, well, what's your reality, right? Because these are constructed realities and anything. So that's where I got into it. And so when this one came up, and interesting that you had somebody ask you that question, I was kind of like, you can read whatever you want, but also what I've come to learn, through the MCU is that if they are going to draw from canon, they're not going to necessarily, you're never getting that, here's the blah, 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 blah series. And it's, it'll be, we've taken some things from this, we've done this, but then they'll also bring in new things that are still consistent, but there's new canon. And again, which only makes sense, especially now that we finally officially have a multiverse, but in the movies, but it's literally, been in the comics and in my mind, in there forever. So for me, it was just I just want to sit back and enjoy the ride and see what they do and how they do it and what kind of position, what perspective you're given, especially in light of how they've played with perspective before. And again, I would say that one of the best examples would have been with WandaVision and that idea, of watching the show and watching it change, in terms of eras and those kinds of things. And and then people coming in and out of the, changing and coming in and out of the hex and all those kinds of things. So that for me, it was a sit back, watch the ride, see where it goes. Okay, yes, they've mentioned dissociative identities. So let's see where they go. I think the part that I loved the most was wondering what they were going to do in terms of the relationship, again, predominantly with Mark and Stephen.
Mm-hmm.
And who is going to be okay, yes, technically it's always Mark that's considered the primary or the original identity, but are they going to do that? And the fact that they started with Stephen was like, okay, where are they going with this? How are they going to do it? And the fact that, going to your thing about representation, the fact that it has been done, what I would say is very thoughtfully, empathetically, and that the humor that's there is not any kind of a demeaning humor. It's sort of the weird thing about the, oh my God, I've just woken up, or what's the thing, or saying this, like something that I guess you say the organic humor that comes out of that disorientation. Like, poor dude is like, going on a date with somebody, but and then, okay, I'm ready for the date. And 2 days ago, I guess I'm going to have a steak now because I feel bad for the waitstaff. And,
and I'll tell you, I mean, right in that first episode, they really captured some of the things that are not depicted very much with like severe mental health, especially it deals with anything with psychosis, DID, and which DID obviously, they're DID, schizophrenia, not the same thing, but they're depicted very closely sometimes. But anything that has to do with a break from reality, they love in Hollywood or whatever, in fiction, they love to depict the scarier elements, the mysterious elements. But the thing that they don't is actually the biggest risk to those who have those diagnoses is sadness, loneliness, depression. That it's very depressing to, I mean, that and Oscar Isaacs does a great nonverbal. For some reason, as I was watching this and he would switch personalities on camera, it was like I felt like he was working out at a micro expression level almost, and his when he orders,
when them scream side by side, and he's got 2 different screams and 2 facial expressions.
Yes, and he does that scene you mentioned where it's like, oh, I made a date, I missed it, I don't know what day it is, I don't know what the hell's going on. And then while the waiter comes up and he does that, where of course, and the character's a vegan, doesn't know how to order a steak really, but doesn't care. And so there was all this crestfallen, you just felt that for a minute where it was like, that would be so sad. Just the sadness, not so much even the social awkwardness, which once again is played up in most projects, but they really, and then again, when he wakes up on the bus after having this horrific experience with Khonshu, and so there's this like just sadness, fear. You get this like depressing feeling of I don't have control of my life. Right.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about it the most was you're not necessarily seeing it through his eyes, but you are getting what I would say, Stephen's perspective on things. You're getting the most, what I would consider most authentic thing, because like you say, the representation always tends to be that external and scary. Look at the scary person that's behaving this way. It's erratically, it's disorienting. And it's like, no. Now you're seeing the disorientation from their perspective. And you're seeing the disorientation. So, and I remember a friend who, again, knows that I do the Marvel stuff and all this kind of stuff. This was not something they were familiar with. Like, they're more familiar with, again, Spider-Man and the other big names kind of thing. And, wanted to watch this. And it was this, what's going on? I have no idea. It's like, oh, you're 3 episodes in and you're confused. Good. That's where you're supposed to be.
Yes,
like
that
actually, if you think you are finishing an episode and knowing at the end what exactly is going on, you're missing the point. Like it's
right.
If you're confused, good. You're supposed to be just as confused as the characters are, because, and then to me, that's the authenticity of it, because you're literally, again, there is no, the origin story doesn't come till the end. You're walking in midstream into this poor bugger's life, and he doesn't know what's going on. He's getting, again, very lonely, lives by himself, has that horrific boss and staff, fellow staff members that don't know his name, and tries to be nice to a kid. Like he's just like, like they embody that. And you just like, how could you not be anything but empathetic with Stephen Grant?
It's interesting too, because as you mentioned, and I think movies at this point, when we were growing up, there's this attitude of like, if you go to a superhero movie, you look for a retelling of a comic book. Now they've actually jumped into where it's its own continuity. It's like a run of comics that is different. Spider-Man Iron Man was his mentor in this universe, in this version,
Yeah.
right? Where it wasn't and whatever. And so one of the things that they redid is, and I'll say, having read some of Moon Knight before this came out, I'm not going to claim to be anybody out there who's a Moon Knight, really, really into Moon Knight and has a lot of info, and you feel free to correct me, and reach out to or whatever. But just
same
go
here. Like again, that's not my biggest rabbit hole in the Marvel universe.
Yeah,
Might become one.
if you're real angry at me, just tweet at me at speak-up. Is that what it is? I'm trying to think of how I want to send them to your Twitter to get mad at me. Anyone angry, just hit Sharon up and tell him that guy sucks.
Yeah.
But no, anyway, but my experience is that Stephen Grant in the comics, this is one thing they changed, where Stephen Grant was like the Bruce Wayne figure. It was like this millionaire, and when he is Mr. Knight, as we see in the suit and everything, he's driving around in a limo doing his fighting evil version of Mark being Moon Knight, swinging from rooftops, right? So they have this kind of different thing where he is like the philanthropic. Philanthropic. There we go. It's easy for you to say, not me. But so, he is that person, and that's a fine character. But it was interesting to see how not only does this someone that I feel like maybe most of us can relate to a little bit better than that mysterious millionaire, but also encompasses what we're talking about, which is the risk of I'm just over here in my own little corner and I can't really invite anyone else in, right? I can't really feel safe inviting anyone else in. I've got myself chained to a bedpost to make sure. I've got a sand trap to make sure I don't leave, in the middle of the night.
I tape up my door to make sure that, all these things. Well, and I think that's the other thing is this is the other part of it, is that you've had those different variations again with the different, even originally, if I'm trying to remember which version it was, I think it might've been the first one, where it was the idea that these are actually alter egos, like secret identities that he used to facilitate different things. So I'm the same guy, but I go under this name to do this, and it allowed him access to different worlds. So, they've already played with this a little bit, and I love the way they're playing with this now. Yeah. And the fact that, like I said, to me, it was the walking in this way that it was, again, very empathetic. And that, again, like you say, very sad, because he has these experiences, and then they view the videotape of what happens in the museum, and he's like, oh, wait for the, and you're like, okay, no, dude's all by himself, there's none of this stuff, and it's the, oh gosh, okay, this is a me thing. And so this idea, though, of again, what the reality was, what these different characters represent, I also found it interesting too, that as you go further along in the story as to who, who's protecting who, because I think the other part that a lot of people forget is where disassociation fits in and how and what. So all of us disassociate in some way, shape, or form. At some point, we've all done the car, the driving to the work or driving to the mall or whatever, and you get caught in your own thoughts, and then you're pulling into the parking lot going, how did I get here? And I'm assuming that if any accidents might have happened along the way, the sounds out, or that I may have caused it, like there were the sounds of brakes or screeching or honking or something
would have woken
me out of it.
Me up. Right.
Yeah. So we've all had that. So I think that's even where that similarity to the bus was, that's right up there with the nodding off on the bus or the subway, and you do the thing and oh God, because you've fallen asleep, weird dream. So it was that idea that, they gave you kind of those little tastes of it, but then on that larger scale of, okay, well, why? It doesn't, those kinds of things that happen in daily life. Well, it happened for a reason. You got caught up in your own head. Some part of your brain, has driven this route 15 times, every week. So therefore you're on autopilot and it keeps you safe, hopefully. But it's still that, oh my God, I was operating a 1-ton vehicle.
Yes. And or an ice,
not cool.
Even a cupcake truck,
exactly. So the fact that he was doing these things, and that was the other part too, when you see him moving between these different places, and then you're realizing he's losing days. This is not just and that you're losing track of the reality. And especially too, and I think this is where I like about how they did it. And again, you find this out, not in a linear way, but that whole thing that we were dropped into the middle of his life. We are then dropped into him suddenly being in different places. And again, suddenly he's got this voice in his head. And then you realize later on, as Mark tells him, well, it all had to do with, it all started around the time of Mom's death. That's when the walls between us started to break down. So you realize it's about these two people that have been inhabiting the same body, the same brain, but they literally haven't got to know each other or become really aware, or at least one less aware of the walls are finally coming down. So you're a part of that that relationship, eventual integration, and those things. And I think that was, again, something, yes, it's done in a certain kind of, within this narrative arc. But again, thinking about the stuff that you and I would have been watching related to this, I mean, we're of the era where, first of all, we grew up with it, being called multiple personality disorder. And it was the time of like Sybil and, Sally Fields. And like you say, all the scary representations, and the one that always got me was the, in soap operas. And it was, I always, whenever that would come up for some character, you're like, my thought was always, okay, so somebody's getting upset that they didn't get the Emmy nod that they wanted. They don't feel like they're being pushed enough. They haven't had anything exciting happen with their character, yada, yada, yada. Oh, so now suddenly they're going to have some sort of dissociative identity, again, which would have been called something else then. But, and that even though they might have a little tag about it later on in terms of being like a positive mental health message, you're like, oh my God, this was so much more about them and the over the top drama and the movie of the week vibe, all that garbage. And then it's like, oh, we can, throw in a mental health thing and look progressive.
Yes. Yes. Well, exactly. And trying to, when it's actually the opposite of progressive, where it's like, oh yeah, but one of them's the evil personality, of course.
Oh, God,
and that's the only one. Yeah. And not that they're necessarily, I mean, because storytelling is always fascinating with that kind of thing. And I guess, not to say that depictions are completely innocent of that, but there's a couple of things, some we've already touched on, that actually amplify this in a more healthy way. Right. And for example, the functionality, and that's the piece that people forget. And when you go back to when there was this kind of splinter off and Steven started to come into existence, he was there to protect Mark. And we think of Mark's the soldier. He's the superhero fighter man. He's the whatever. And it's like, no, this happened. And typically this is where I heard this from a psychiatrist long ago. And I'm always interested in people's experiences who've actually been there. So anybody, once again, hit me up. But it seems to match most of the people I've met with DID, that you move from a place where you are vulnerable and weak to a place where you are stronger. Now, but stronger can be interpreted different ways. Obviously, it's not like, I move into a personality who can murder everyone, which is like what the old school, like, the bad guy, whatever. It's like, in this case, it was, no, I'm going to move into a personality, a life that has a happy home life, that is this kind of, and when you look at it, one of the things about Steven is he's he seems a little bit like bullied and kowtowed or whatever to people who are pushing him around, but he's essentially a nice guy who loves his mom, who's interested in interested in antiquity and studies and self-improvement and all of those things.
Wouldn't hurt a fly, always trying to be helpful, as opposed to when you think about all the guilt that Mark carries. So it's that idea of, from the, I consider myself a murderer, even about things that, because of things I've been blamed with, right back to a phase where it's like, okay, you were a child and this was an accident, but you're being held accountable for this, to all the other things where, again, you weren't necessarily the lead on this, or you were told, so it's all of this guilt and this negative perception of himself as this violent, murderous person. So what is the altar that he creates? This proverbial wouldn't hurt a fly guy that has the single finned goldfish, got to get that would have been the, oh my God, here's this poor fish and probably nobody else is going to take him. So I'm going to bring him home and I'm going to call him Gus and this and that, whatever. Like it was just that, even the little girl, when she's sticking garbage in there, he doesn't like call her out. It's it looks like somebody's, mistaken this for a garbage dump, and just, and whatever. And, and then, takes her over to the thing. Oh, this is where they're going to stick the hook in and drag all your innards out. Again, don't get me wrong, a little bit, there's a little bit of a dark thing there, but he was just trying to be Mr.
And yet not, and that one of the things that I also really appreciated about it was that he was not a weak character. He wasn't, I didn't feel like he was portrayed as a weakling. He was just, in the beginning first episode, I thought, he's not a weakling. He is someone who isn't comfortable in a fight with 6 mercenaries at once, but that's in that way very much like most of us. I think, a lot of people have this kind of like, this low key action hero vibe in their own mind of like, here's, oh, come on, just grab the gun. And it's like, no, most of us would be the person who throws the gun at someone and is like, oh, wait, that was a gun. I probably shouldn't have thrown that. I don't know what I'm doing. And he literally says, I don't know what I'm doing. And he's the reasonable one when Conchi's like, hey, do something. And he's like, I don't know what to do. I'm a normal person. Yeah.
I've just woken up in a foreign country. People are doing some weird stuff, and now I'm having to run away again. And that was even, I think, the thing too with what's his escape vehicle? I mean, it's the cupcake van.
Cupcake truck, right?
Cupcake truck. And it's all of these things that I think were these really interesting nods. And then, like I said, you saw it in a sense from his perspective, because it's and then something happens and now I'm all bloody, and what the heck? Okay, and people are, even the fact too that when he came to on that hill and he sort of pulls himself together and he sees those guys from the window and he like waves and he has no idea that these are the people that have been shooting at him, and he's just like, oh hi, people in the window.
Now there's speaking of a little Easter egg potential. I don't know if you saw this, but somebody online, this has nothing to do with anything clinical, but that castle. They never explain whose castle that is, really. I don't know that Harrow has a castle. He doesn't seem like a castle type of guy. However, it does seem to match. It's some kind of vaguely Eastern European country, potentially. And it does seem to look a lot like the castle of a certain Victor Von Doom, according to people, some comic panels that I've seen posted on Twitter. So there you go. Could it have been, maybe he was stealing that from Dr. Doom's personal library? Who knows?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the other part too, is now how they're doing all of these things where you can have interconnections and have these things, and a thing that might be a random detail over here turns out to be an Easter egg for something else that you didn't know was an Easter egg yet. So they can just have it as its own little thing, or they can bring it back in later if people loved it too. You never know what they're up to. But it was one of the thoughts that I also have, along with the functionality piece, is they depict how the two, not the third as much, maybe we'll mention him in a little bit, but the two, that Mark and Steven, there is also this friendship when they are thrown into the existential sort of like after death, afterlife, whatever, with the wonderful hippo goddess. They have this meeting, this great meeting that I think I saw online. Everybody I saw comment on it loved this scene where Mark finds Steven they're embodied separately, and the first thing they do is embrace that they are in this together, that they can relate to each other in a way that no one else can, right? Whether they're angry with each other or whether they're hugging each other, that there's this real brotherhood kind of thing. Whereas everything before, and again, especially considering you're seeing it predominantly from Steven's side initially, it was it was the reflection thing, which again, I also thought was a really interesting vehicle for how they would communicate, or how you would see it was and so it was always that, and there was always things, again, usually Mark telling Steven, no, give me the body. I mean, that's the other part too, is, he comes to it and it's like, give him the body, and give what in the and so that idea that there was always this conflict, and Mark not wanting to tell him necessarily why. It's just like, no, this is the thing and I need to do it and you can't handle this. And where he made that one comment about no, actually, I have been through this before, same body, right? So hopefully some muscle memory. And you're like, well, okay, I'm not quite sure how that really translates the way you think it does, but not on one level, not a wrong assumption for him to be making as he's trying to sort this all out and wanting to be, and especially when you think about the fact that, again, at that place where they're walking in, and I think this goes to that whole how this stuff unfolds, is the fact that I clearly know something's up. I don't know what it is. I keep either, you know, I'm clearly like blacking out, losing time, ending up in weird places. So I've got all of these things in place, but I don't know exactly what it is. And so I'm trying to stay up all night, and I'm trying to do all of these weird management things. And then again, they have the functionality of, okay, well, here's all the Egyptian stuff that I'm going to study, and here's all these, you know, these things. And, you know, you stop and think about it, like that is a much more, I guess you say, organic and natural process that on some level, yes, this has happened and there's been this creation of an altar, but it's done generally, you know, in such a seamless way. You know, nobody sits down on a Tuesday afternoon and says, oh, I need to cope with this, and so therefore I'm going to manufacture this alternate identity and reality and and I mean, we all compartmentalize in certain ways, but and consciously, that's, you know, that's not what this is. And so when it's when other things come up that you realize something, and so it's this weird thing. Well, on one level, your brain is created it, you actually tend to go a very long time before you realize that, and you realize, and so it was that, to me, it was again that very natural thing where it's like something's up, but I don't know what it is.
And it's very much like how people talk about this concept of hearing voices. And when we say that, it's like hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, visual hallucinations. All of our brains have this capacity to hear things and say things. It's just, it depends on if the intensity, the frequency, and whether or not we are consciously having control of it. And so, you know, we're all talking to ourselves in our heads all the time, right? Just like we disassociate and we compartmentalize and we segment, sometimes on purpose and sometimes organically, but we become, it becomes something that all of a sudden we look at as this crazy, weird, supernatural, creepy, but it's like, no, it's actually an extension of natural coping skills. It's just an inflated, or I should say inflamed, perhaps it was one way to put it. But one of the things that I thought was very powerful was the moment where Harrow, the bad guy, the Ethan Hawke bad guy, who turns to, you know, he's talking to Steven, and he says, do you think Khonshu selected you because you were broken, or did he break you, essentially? And I love that one part of Steven's reply, and that was, I'm not broken.
That's,
right.
Oh, yeah.
And so here's someone who, is mentally vulnerable, who obviously has, you know, dissociative identity disorder, as we would label it now. But he's saying, I'm not broken. And that I thought was a very powerful message to slip in there, which, and people I've known over the years who have come to accommodate their alternates, you know, and to integrate into where there is that shared awareness. Once again, this is, you know, Hollywoodified or whatever, but to say that there is actually strengths in each alternate and each alter that do take turns, and that handing the driver's seat over to someone consciously, often not consciously, but to sort of there is a trust in the greater intention to protect and be good for myself that people tend to develop over time as they get more healthy. And I think people usually would think, well, healthy means the alters go away, right? But that's not always the case.
No. It's about the integration and the management. And that was the thing too, is watching Harrow and trying to figure out who Harrow represented. And especially when you see Harrow then as Dr. Harrow, and the idea that, you know what, he's saying the same thing in both places. And again, going to this idea, and maybe this is a little meta, you know, he even made a comment at one point, again, about this idea of organizing, you know, methods, organizing systems, and that these are just frameworks. And then that conversation goes a particular way, like, you know, these are just organizing things and and we just, and you're like, oh, wait a second, you've naturally led to a place where it's like, what is reality? Because I think for most folks, and again, what you expect is and he comes to and he's in a psych ward, so therefore that must be reality, and all of this is whatever. And you're like, well, wait a second, there is nothing to say that the psych ward actually isn't in fact just a construct, and maybe is a way of viewing all of these other things. So it's not about he sees these things in Harrow's office, and then based on whatever it is, he's now created these other identities and these other things influenced by these or influenced by this childhood movie.
It's not a mental health version of
this could actually be the organizing construct that allows him to sort some of this out in a different way. So there's nothing saying that that's the reality. And especially too, when that stuff happens again, after he's been shot, and it's okay, well, again, if he's just been shot, he's probably unconscious or in some other kind of a mental state. So again, is this really reality, or is it just, again, one of these things? And I think that's the part that I love about this, is that in my mind, I still don't know what reality is. And that as much as I know that there are, a variety of alters, and I, going back and rewatching, we were actually introduced to Jake in the first episode.
Yes.
We just didn't know it. And that you have these different things, and especially, and you realize afterwards when there's these different things where it's like, wait a second, that's even bloodier than, oh, wait a second, oh, that's a Jake moment. Like, my guess is that stuff that happened with Harrow in that first, that's a Jake thing. Yeah. But we just didn't know it was Jake because, again, like Stephen, we're just flipped out about the, what the heck, castle guy with the,
well, and even in a more subtle way. So it wasn't until I'd seen the second or third episode that someone else said, when it was something online where those of us who knew that there's a Jake Lockley in there, that there's a third more violent personality, or at least more street scrapper kind of personality that has less rules, let's say, still a good guy, anti-hero kind of approach. So we're kind of like, are they going to bring him in? Are they not? They changed Steven. What are they going to do? Somebody else brought this up to me and I hadn't thought of it. Who asked the girl out? I mean, who asked that woman out? That wasn't Mark. Mark's not going to ask her out. He's, and so I was like, oh no, that's right. Yeah. So even
that didn't dawn on me until later, because at first you're figuring, again, okay, they're going to play Mark and Stephen first and whatever. So you figure Mark, and you're like, oh yeah, but there's the accent thing. And then it's like, oh no, they've got his wife involved. So why would he? And then you're like, oh, wait a second. Exactly. There's, there's somebody else here.
Yeah, right away.
As you put it in the first one, but wasn't named. And at this point, again, like Stephen, you don't know what's going on. And even that realization, and again, Mark later on with the not wanting to take him into certain places in certain rooms, and that whole reality of, oh, wait a second, I'm not the primary identity.
Right.
And that, and so he had his, so they had that little existential crisis moment of the, who came first kind of thing. And, oh, wait a second, it wasn't me.
And where does this guy fit in? It's an interesting thing because is that leaning into, and I guess we'll have to see if and when they go on and we see more development with this character, the third personality, the third alter or second alter, I don't know how we're counting them. Anyway, the third personality that lives within Moon Knight. So are they leaning into the trope of here's a violent one, at least, well, okay, here's the evil, violent personality. I think at this point, to me, if I'm being, and I tend to be generous being a Marvel stan, right? So I look at that and say, maybe it's like, there's a risk there, right? I mean, they're risking stepping right into that, and they avoided it so elegantly with the other two. I guess you'll have to wait and see. I know based off the source material, Jake Lockley's like this sort of like street smart, like cabbie who is like a criminally involved, who's not afraid to get his hands dirty in certain ways, and takes care of some of the nastier things, like on Khonshu is like, kill this guy. It's like Mark would be like, I'm not going to just kill a guy, and Steven would absolutely not want to just kill a guy. And Jake would be like, is he a bad guy?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, he's a bad guy,
Well, and I think that's the other part too, though, that even if you go into that where, yes, he's technically more violent, this is what goes back to the idea, and again, right from the very beginning of the whole stuff with Khonshu and the justice idea. So in other words, if he thinks he's doing it for a good cause, unlike Mark somewhat and Stephen for sure, and I would say even the whole like the Batman code of conduct, right? He doesn't. Jake does not have the Batman code of conduct, and so it's the whatever needs to be done. It's for the greater good, and so I think that's even why he's only kind of dripped in there in those little hidden, again, kind of Easter egg ways that because there's something else that he leans towards, and that's probably going to go more into the dynamic with Khonshu as well. And again, I would still see it as being less of the scary representation, stereotypical representation that we've seen of DI and of schizophrenia, than where does this alter function and how and why. And so Stephen is, Mark has got this lousy batch of stuff and just tons of guilt. So here's Stephen that gets to have the nice, very, I would say proper life, in the sense that it's even like he's a proper English, guy that works at a museum and does all this, stuff. And he's just so kind and whatever. Is he quirky? Absolutely. But again, still very well-intentioned and polite. So I think that's the other part that I like about this whole, again, that portrayal there of Stephen, I think, is really wonderful. And I think what's interesting too is when you go into the Harrow stuff, Harrow's saying the same thing on both sides. And it goes back to that language that you mentioned about broken. In both cases, it's about brokenness. And what I came to realize is that in some respects, what he represented to me, I mean, yes, obviously there's the characters and again, what we're doing in terms of the narrative and the associations and different things. He kind of represents the broader society stereotype. So in other words, and knowing what's right, because that's the other thing. In both cases, he taps into some, I know better than you. Like, I've already dealt with Khonshu. I know all about this. And this is why and this is why you need to do this and stop being used by him. But you got to come over to Amit now. Or it's the, his little nonsense pendulum. And I'm like, okay, I get where you think that works. But that, it's also oh, why are you bleeding? And I still love the line where I don't think you know as much about this as you think you do, from
yes. and actually the fact that it comes from, well, first of all, I mean, that's another Jake moment when he stands up and he's like, you must get pretty good. Yeah, you did pretty good at this, doc, or whatever. And then but I love that it went to Stephen, and this is another example of Stephen being a personality of strength, right? Of strength in his positions, because he's the one who's like, look, do I think this is real, where I'm going to be in this hospital and look at your foot bleeding, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to go back to where I'm saving the world and be that character. And like a choice, like I'm making a choice to invest in the belief and the faith that this is my real life. And which also, which when he first has a conversation with Harrow as well, he actually, and they write it so that it's, it's a chuckle as well. It's a comedic-ish, but when he says, so you're going to take out people who are going to do something bad. So children, and he's like, is everybody here okay with that? And like almost incredulous, which once again, he is not a warrior. He's not a soldier. He's sitting surrounded by those bad people. He could easily go, yeah, whatever you say. Sure. I'm that weakling. But instead he's principled and says, I'm not even going to pretend to agree with you.
Killing babies?
Yeah. I'm not even going to pretend to agree with you, because he's morally strong. Right.
Well, and even when he comes back, again, after they decide they're both going to do this together, and it's the whole renegotiating with Khonshu, and he comes up as Mr. Moon and then gets into this, and like, oh my God, he sent the Indians, like, well, what are we going to do? And It's like, really, at a time like this with so much at stake, you're going to negotiate? And it's like, learn from the best, bird brain. Like, you taught me this. Right. Like, if there's anybody that, and so he is a protector, and that you get those different lines too, especially again, I think about in Duat, and again, one of those times where there's the big hug and the whatever, it's like the no, like, you are actually, he nothing to apologize for. You've done all of these things. Like, he acknowledges what's happened to Mark and the role that they've played and all these different kinds of things. And I think that's the other part that I really enjoy about this, is that it's about this growing relationship between the two of them, which again, Bertie said, this doesn't exactly parallel, the integration process that most would go through, but it does, I would say, reflect the energy and the authenticity of it in a cinematic way, and that we haven't seen done well otherwise. So yes, it's not clinically accurate, but I think it actually captures the authenticity of it, which I find really interesting. When you consider, what kind of a fantastical world this is, they're actually able to capture the spirit, the energy, and the outcome in ways that's more authentic than the movie of the week, supposedly all pro mental health, fuzzy movies.
And if we can, and it's one of those things where if we can have a training montage where Rocky trains in a week to be an expert boxer, and we wink and nod at that, and we say, yeah, I know that it would take longer, and let's just assume that the music, this one song, is encompassing. We can certainly see someone accommodate their alters right in this way, and I feel like one of the great things, and I sometimes extend this farther than some people do, but I think you're cool. I'll see how cool you are with it. As far as strengths based, I know you and I are both radically strengths based, is what I would call it, right?
Yeah.
As we talk about the superpowers and everything that are inherent to our personality characteristics, even those that are defined as symptoms. I kind of wonder, at what point do we stop labeling everything with the D at the end, the disorder part?
Oh,
right?
well, and that's why I don't actually call it DID. I call it dissociative identity.
That's good. That's great.
Any place I can drop the disorder part, I do.
Because at a certain level, you have to look at it and say someone's brain, not everyone's brain is capable of forming alters and disassociating to the point where they have that big of a protector. As we said, we all do it. And especially if you work within a framework of internal family systems, or EMDR sometimes touches on this too a little bit, which is we all have these different emotional parts of ourselves, but to actually have one that is segmented off, even to the point where we might not, for a time in our life, even be aware it exists. There's certainly weaknesses, if we want to go superpower weakness. There's certainly risks associated with being that way. However, what is that if not, that's a superpower to have a mind that can disassociate at that level. I really believe not everyone has the capability of doing it. And who knows how many people, because this is usually almost always trauma, extreme neglect, abuse is what the genesis of these things.
Mark has gone through. Yep.
And so how many people out there have dissociative identity and are alive today because they have it, that they would have not made it, in other words, one way or another, however you interpret that, right? Suicide or abuse or addiction. If they would have been constantly
the brain
dealing.
Trying to keep the brain and the body alive by whatever means necessary.
Yeah.
And so it's a trauma response. And when you think about the story that's there, so would Mark be alive if he didn't have this, much more positive, joyful person that gets to have a relationship with his mom and think everything's okay, and live, frankly, a kind of middling, nondescript life, as a polite, if albeit a little bit sort of milquetoast British, gentleman. Like it's just that it's like it's all the safe, warm, and fuzzy, even to the point that he's a little bit of a doormat, but then that's because he's like so avoidant of confrontation, because Mark's life has been filled with so much. And when you think about, again, what he went through, and they have tweaked it from one of the other versions, like this is more about the family as opposed to some other stuff that had to do with the father as a rabbi. And again, so whatever, like to me, that's one of that's like, you're fiddling with which kind of icing is on the cake when it's really about what flavor is the cake. And so it's you put sprinkles on this time instead of, buttercream, whatever. And so it's that kind of a thing where I think, to me, it makes perfect sense. It would be as far as a coping mechanism. And I think it gets reflected, first of all, and like you say, those I'm not broken comments, coupled with, again, in the duot, where he basically, in talking to Stephen, Mark says, you were my only superpower. You were my, it's not about these things that Khonshu gives me that makes me Moon Knight. It's the fact that you've actually protected me. Khonshu's made me do some stuff that, again, I thought, and I became indebted to him and whatever else. And this also makes me wonder too about the relationship with Khonshu. I kind of get the impression that, and again, being a god, it's kind of playing into this, but he's the omniscient one that's aware of all the personalities. and
Yes.
identities, and that he's made arrangements with all the ones that he wants to work with. And then there's, oh geez, the idiot's
He's
got
like,
the
oh
body.
boy.
Because he
And
knows that Stephen won't go with this.
well,
And
and
when he has to do with it, then he has to do
just
with it.
like a manipulator or a bully, if we want to say, and Khonshu, even in the comics, is, you know, famously, if you're, you know, into it, well, Khonshu isn't an asshole. He is a controlling, narcissistic, and it is one of those that is kind of the, you could say, the Nick Fury of this situation, but you could go a little further and say the oh my gosh, now I'm going to forget who's Viola Davis's character that she plays in DC, the evil or Nick Fury character from the DC world. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I
Suicide
know, and I'm
Squad.
drawing a blank too. And now you say it, the deeper it goes back into my brain.
Yes,
and I'll either blurt it out in 5 minutes or at 3 a.m.
Yes.
And again, feel free to, hit us up on social media to fill in what's currently fallen out of our brains. We won't.
If I can vamp just long enough to say Amanda Waller. There we go.
Yes.
I had to IMDb search the Suicide Squad, but somebody who is the greater good. Although in the DC cinematic universe, she's straight up kind of a villain, but someone who's like, if I have to blow up this village in order to kill that one person who, is like, now I don't know if Khonshu, whatever. I don't want to say that. Somewhere in between. Let's put him in between Nick Fury and Amanda Waller. That's where we're going to put Khonshu on the scale of manipulating controllers. But it is important for Khonshu to put Stephen down. And who knows, if we want to read maybe a little deeper into this than maybe I need to, but it's important to, if you're going to bully someone, they need to feel less than. And everybody else is like, don't listen to him, he sucks. And then as soon as you put it, I hadn't thought of this till you said it. As soon as Stephen is involved, it's like, we're renegotiating. And it's like, all of a sudden, Khonshu, Mark didn't pull this off in all the years they've worked together. The other dude maybe didn't want to, but it's like Stephen, Mr. Strength Protector, most moral of the three, probably most moral guidelines to say, most moral strength to say, we're renegotiating, buddy. This is not cool what you've been doing to us.
Well, and I think that also plays with the idea of, again, when we think of the stereotypical descriptions of alters and what roles they play, it's the, there's always and again, good Lord, like, again, pick a soap opera, pick a whatever. It's the so-called protective alter is always like, again, the big tough guy, the big that kind of thing. And you're like, well, no. Actually, the protector here is the soft guy. And it's because he's the morally strong, character. He's the morally strong aspect of it. And so the rest of them while they might have the physical strength and they might be doing certain aggressive acts, are not actually as morally strong as Stephen is. And I thought that was really interesting too. And even how they, first of all, introduced Khonshu. And again, it's about this idea of justice and protect, and meting out justice, to those who have done harm. And then to watch Harrow's character, who again, it's I used to be the avatar before, and this is the problem because now I go around with scales of justice. And, and I work on behalf of Amit, and it's the idea of, getting rid of people before they do the thing. And like you say, the baby comment, but what was really interesting is as you watch this, it's like, wait a second. Again, like when you think of, again, what's the reality and what's the hallucination part of it? You think about those scales on the arm and the fact that everywhere Stephen seems to go, it's like, oh my God, there's more people with scales on their arm. And again, this idea of the representation of the broader society where you're being judged, and everywhere you go, there's somebody with scales. And pass or fail. And then, so that to me, in both of those realities, that's what Harrow represents, is the again, he's personified here, but the larger shoulda. This is somebody that's perpetually shoulding on you, telling you what you got wrong. And that, yes, Khonshu's got his own bullying narcissism thing going on. But when you bring in Amit and who Amit is, you're like, okay, well, wait a second. Suddenly Khonshu's starting to look a little bit more reasonable.
Right.
Because we got Mr. we got this crocodile purge thing going on where, apparently offing babies is okay because in 32 years, they might do a crappy thing. And just the whole, notion of free will. And suddenly you're like, okay, Khonshu is a jerk, but you know what? He is not the crown prince here right now. Like, there are some people beating him at his own game. And that was the other part that I thought, because that's that one thing where you got, okay, so you've got the the narcissists and that kind of shoulding that you're getting from both Khonshu in terms of his own agenda, Harrow, again, in terms of what he represents. But then you've got this other thing where, again, and it goes to that language of broken, where Amit and Harrow are like the, again, talk about your judgment and the broken notion, talk about the, to me, that's right up there with when folks used to say that those of us with diagnoses, should be sterilized. And that like it's like Amit's going down the eugenics path.
Yes. Because
I don't care what warm fuzzy place you start off rationalizing that and thinking you're doing it. Like the slippery slope starts about 2 seconds after you open your mouth on that. And
at which point, because there has to be an arbiter of what is and isn't broken and what is and isn't good or bad. And then of course, immediately there's the hypocrisy there too, where Harrow is like, all right, you're back now. I assume I'm dead now, right? Because I suck and I'm this fanatic who I'm bringing to pass this brave new world that I don't deserve to be part of. And Amit's like, nah, screw it. And it's like, and even Harrow's like, oh, okay, well, it's kind of weird, but it's like it even takes your most fanatical follower aback to say, no, I like you. And by the way, the message, of course, being that no, you're doing the same thing I'm doing, which is we're bad guys, and so we're not. I just want to control, right? Is kind of a thing. And it is interesting how it goes back to, in a way, here in a way, Moon Knight's championing those that are innocent, but also those that are guilty, that are going to be proactively pruned. Because what going back to this, who decides, right? Who decides if a person does bad things, you can prevent the bad things. What if they reform later? That doesn't mean that they didn't do the bad thing if you're going on a strict scales, right?
Redemption arcs. You're totally eliminating
no redemption. And so we wouldn't have Loki, the show. Anyway, that's what some people get a little salty about, even the level of redemption that's possible in so I hold out hope for we'll get into that in our next discussion about Multiverse of Madness. There's someone I hold out hope for there, and which we'll get to here in a minute for today's recording. But anyway, you get back to a theme that I think is I would hope that we're going to see throughout this phase, but I think in Shang-Chi you saw the desire to redeem Dad. In Spider-Man No Way Home, that whole thing is about going out of my way to redeem or save people who aren't even trying to be saved, right? And so who knows, what we're going to see moving forward with some of these, but there's a theme developing that actually would make a half decent or maybe decent episode as well. We should think about that, the saving versus the punishing.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting too, you mentioned again in terms of the comparison to Spider-Man, because again, they're trying to see if they can redeem folks that, again, in some cases really don't want redemption. But one of the lines that Harrow uses, again, in both realities is the I can't help you if you don't want to help yourself. And it's like, well, wait a second, that sounds more, again, it's a well-meaning phrase and it has some value. You can't, you can bring the horse to water, can't make them drink. People have to be at a right place in the recovery, but it's a double-edged sword because it can be meant in the sense of, okay, you have to get, and how many times have you been in a relationship with a client where it's all you can really do at some point is share what the next type of things are, share some ideas to get them to think about, and know that it's not like they're going to necessarily, pick them up and implement them right there, but that at some point, because you've sown those seeds, there's this something else happens, things unfold, and those seeds are able to, start to, take root, and they have this aha moment of, okay, you remember when you mentioned that thing to me? Oh, I get it now. I get it now. When you first said it, but it's like that's all you can do at that point is you're sowing the seeds. You're not expecting them to pick it up, but you at least know that you're laying the groundwork. And while it would be wonderful and miraculous if in the next 24 hours that piece of advice or that therapeutic tool is used, you're also knowing that all I can do is keep mentioning it on a relatively regular basis in a way that I'm not shooting on them, but just a friendly reminder. And if they pick it up in 2 months, better than not at all.
And that's famously, that's a phrase that's famously used as a cop out, at least in the mental health industry and the substance abuse in particular. They weren't ready. Well, if you're not ready, then I'll use that. There's a shaming to when treatment doesn't work, instead of just saying, isn't it sad that this isn't working? We tend to say, let's blame the client or blame the patient.
Okay, they're not at this place. This is a useful tool, but we're apparently a little earlier on in the journey.
Or maybe they're even doing something that's also healthy, but it's not what I wanted them to do yet. That's the other thing. Speaking of Harrow, and speaking of being controlling, it's like, well, you didn't go through our program in the right order of steps. Oh, okay. Well, then I guess I suck. Thanks.
Well, and again, and how he would play those again in the same way that he would play the I know Khonshu. It's the I've had these same things, I've done whatever. And I think that's the, again, especially in light of what you and I do, is there's places for empathy and sharing, that you've got lived experience. But the idea is that everybody's journey is their own. And so if you're sharing something like that, it's more about building a bond of a relationship to say, again, I've walked a similar path. I've got a similar experience to knowing that crappy headspace. And I'd like to be able to, again, build a relationship and let you know that I'm on your side. But I also understand that my path and your path are not the same. And just because we pass through the same intersection, we didn't pass through it in the same way at the same time with the same things under our belt. So just because I turned left down this other block doesn't mean you're not going to keep walking straight ahead or hop a fence, or do whatever in another direction. So I think that was the other part, was just that whole like, oh God, my God, like, if there was ever anybody like Khonshu would get upset if you didn't do what he wanted to, because he's the god and he's the boss and you're supposed to be his avatar. Harrow was like that weird, like, so you kind of go, okay, again, he's the cocky a-hole god. Harrow is this guy that is like, oh, you think you're playing the empathy card, but you're not. You think you're doing this thing, and it's like, I know what you think you're doing, but you're doing it really poorly, and it's really offensive, and then you're wondering why you get pushback, or the hold on, I'm just going to go save the world because I think that's far more useful than sitting here talking to you. Boom, I'm going to go back and so like I said, from what's reality, it because this is about, and again, we think about the larger thing, and we're in Marvel universes where, gods exist and people have, gamma rays do this and spiders do that and blah, blah, blah. We've already got a certain level of suspension of disbelief. But what I actually love about this is, that questioning of what is reality. Is the real world actually the one that has where the gods are involved? And is the, what we're seeing, because we see two different institutions as well. I don't know, Harrow refers to the Putnam one, and I can't remember if he says it, is it Chicago or Philadelphia? I can't remember what city it is, but it's an American city. And then the final scene where you see Harrow being led out in the white limo that says Spectre on the license, that's the Sienkiewicz. And you see them pulling up to London.
Okay.
And that's named after Bill, so the artist. So it's those kinds of things. It's not even is it the same place? Because it looked like the same place in some respects. Or again, even when Tara mentioned the whole, oh wait a sec, okay, I guess it can be whatever you want. I've just never done psychiatric institutions before, and that was the other part too, in terms of what's the reality, what's the hallucination, what's the construct. Really, would that kind of a goddess really be screwing up her lines that much if that's part of her job? Yeah. So again, what's the reality? What's the construct? Are they really dead, or are they? So I love the fact that in some respects it's more of a place to. It's a sandbox of sorts. It's like this intellectual and psychological sandbox. And that I think if we try to get too much into which place was reality, because I need to sort this out. I need to know who which you think from a very clinical perspective. Yes, we need to figure out who the primary identity is. We need to figure out what the alters are. We need to figure out what the hallucinations, delusions, and disassociations are. And we need to organize it all. And like, you know what? Sometimes, and I think that was where some of that pushback in the later episodes from them was coming with, like, wait a second, what if I don't accept your reality? Because you've just told me that a pen is either a writing utensil or it's my dog's chew toy, and neither of which is wrong. So, so what's to say that I haven't made this up in this reality to sort some other things out, because I'm trying to figure out how to deal with, like, this really bossy, haughty God, and my other identity, who we've had a lot of back and forth, push and shove, but you know what? Maybe the two of us together can sort this out. And you're just standing in our way. So, you know, not exactly advocating for like the sort of total client pushback, but that idea that sometimes I think, and again, that Hera represents it, it's the, here, I've got a clinical path for you, and it's set out this way, as opposed to, oh, okay, you know what? I have a rough arc. Yes, I've got a plan, but I've got a plan that's got flexibility enough to address things. And I'd like to think that we can check off the certain boxes along the way. But if we have to wind and do this and do that to get you there, you know what? I'm more about the big picture. And if we have to take a slightly different path to get to, you know, points A, B, and C, good.
And to
whatever
listen.
works for you.
Right. And to
it's
listen
more
to
important
people.
that we get there.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, do you want to switch gears a little and talk about Doctor Strange?
Okay, totally. Yeah.
Does
Really?
that work?
Like, you have to ask me twice. Like, no, I'm good. I think there was, like I said, there's tons of stuff in Moon Knight. I'm looking forward to the next season, but I think,
man, I hope they do a next season.
I think we've covered the big stuff.
Yeah.
I don't have anything left on my to-do list other than, again, the potential for going 8 solid hours down a rabbit hole.
Yeah, exactly. We're good. So yeah, let's retool it. I hope they do a second season. I know that they submitted it for an award as a limited run miniseries, but that's a trick that they often do because there's less people competing for that one.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're actually starting to get called on it now because they did it before, and they think that the Academy or whoever gives Emmys is going to come back around, and they've started to use evidence, because now famously people will apply for the award under, it's a miniseries, because there's less competition in that, you know, but they've awarded a couple of them. There were miniseries that now, like Loki, I think, won for that. And then they obviously are doing a second season. And so it's not a miniseries, right? And so they now the people, the powers that be, are making some, like, they can come back and say, well, you've released these tweets and you put this end caption, this end credits thing on it, and we think we don't believe you. You need to put it under.
Oh boy.
Anyway, so either way, but I just hope there is. I think
Hollywood
there will be
shenanigans, whatever. Yeah. I mean,
so that was what. Though I know people were saying, "Oh no, they have it coded as a miniseries. They're not going to do another season," but that doesn't really mean anything.
No. And I mean, and there's been plenty of things that have happened in the MCU where it's like, oh, this was put out as a feeler with hopes of doing another thing.
And how do you do? You know,
it didn't happen based on.
Yeah, and how do you do? We do a Scarlet Scarab series, and now Moonlight's part of that. They can do whatever the hell they want. Yeah, that's the point. And speaking of doing whatever they want, that's a segue into talking about Doctor Strange. The new Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness has hit, and it's hot from theaters today. I don't know why I'm leading into it like nobody knows what it is. If anybody's tuning into this, especially if they've heard any episodes of Sharon and myself talking about these things, they know what they're getting.
Welcome to the rabbit hole.
This is going to be there's several as we try to focus. We're both super fans here, I think, of these things, obviously. But at the same time, we always are picking apart some of the psychological impact and psychological elements of some of these stories. And gosh, you know, here we are, as it's been heralded as the MCU's first real horror movie, like some real horror movie tropes and some, I believe, the most jarring deaths that we've seen in the Marvel universe in some ways, even though they're not necessarily the people that we know and love. But they're just the starkness of how they're done, and that they're actual violent deaths. So anyway, lots to pick apart here.
Oh my gosh, so much.
Yeah.
And I think it was brilliant. And again, like so many other things we've talked about, is that there's this larger canon. There's all these different things. And again, I get that, you know, there's always fan theories, or there's talk of this or talk of that. I mean, the one that I thought was hilarious was the whole, like, if I saw another meme of somebody photoshopping Tom Cruise's face onto an Iron Man suit, like, oh, get over it. And the, you know, and also too, in terms of, well, okay, we've got multiverses and, you know, what are we going to have in them? And then, okay, well, Spider-Man did this, and then this one did that. And the weird sense of expectations is like, yes, it opens up stuff. But as we talked about before, like, remember we talked about like Spider-Man and G, like when you see those scenes and all those different things, are they there as launching off points for, you know, Multiverse of Madness, or are they launching off for other things? Or are they sometimes just that, here's the nod, we can't put in all of the things. So therefore it's a way of putting it in, you know, not leaving it and having it being this big gap, but also knowing that that's all we can do at this point, or at this. So we got the nod, we filled in the blank. Yes, it might seem like it's token, but then that's also the other part too, is like, again, you never know what's the Easter egg, what's the, we're just trying to round this out so that nobody says we didn't do it. And what's the thing that's, you know, going to turn into something else. But it's amazing how much people invest in, well, they did this and this, so therefore, or I have expectations of blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, you know what, then go join the movie industry, go get a job.
Right. Go make a,
but get off my Facebook about it.
yeah, I know. I'm one of those where I feel like I have a lot of little fan theories and headcanon in my own head. And I obviously am strongly emotionally invested in a lot of these things, but and so, yeah, I have those feelings too, where it's like, gee, I wish they would have done this. But at the same time, I'm like you, it's like, well, I'm not the one making the story, you know, and certain things I knew, for example, you know, going into this, that Wanda was probably going to be the bad guy, even though I really like Wanda and I didn't want it to happen. But I know they're drawing from like House of M, and they're drawing from some of the other comic, you know, story arcs where Wanda has her moments, you know, or where she has her arc that she goes through, that includes villainy, right? And it sure does now, as far as villainy goes.
Well, and what's interesting too, and I wasn't aware of this initially, but again, my son goes, you know, a bred a nerd that found his own rabbit hole. So what can I say? Nice. You know, one of those, oh God, the student has exceeded the master in some places, where it's like, oh, I hadn't read that particular. Okay, you know, teach me. But it was the idea that, again, when you think about the impact that COVID had, initially, what was from what he has said, that this was actually supposed to come out before WandaVision, but then the TV stuff was easier to, you know, kind of get out and going, so that some of their, like, Marvel's own timeline and order of things, so that they actually had to do some rewrites because WandaVision was supposed to come after the fact. So this was, you know, this was more about some other things. So I think first of all, the fact that, you know, if people are wondering about things, don't just sit there and go, okay, so it's what was supposed to happen before, and therefore, and then it leads to the hex. It's like, no, they did the rewrites. And just because certain things, if anything, actually, to me, this works. And had he not, like, informed me of that, it wouldn't have mattered, in a sense, because you see what happens in WandaVision. You see her go off and study to become, you know, the Scarlet Witch, is how, you know, so that's there. And then this happens afterwards with the rewrites. This still makes sense because we don't know what she was learning in that place, in that space. We don't know how she was embodying this. We don't know all these other things. So the fact that she's, even as you see there, constructed this reality where you see this, oh, here's the nice, pretty orchard. And then you're like, oh, not so much, kind of a hellscape.
Yeah.
Wow. That's, you know, talk about, like, again, a nice bit of icing on that.
Well, there's that little, there's that part, right, where Doctor Strange says, and it's interesting, the slip in the little, I don't know if it's a spell or whatever it is, that he says, like, wow, it almost tastes real. And she says, you mean sweet? Yeah, I mean sweet, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know why did I say real? That's funny. And so, and it is interesting how those happen. I guess also, speaking of that, of how COVID and things get changed, America Chavez's power of hopping dimensions was supposed to actually be the fundamental reason why the spell gets messed up in No Way Home, but they had to switch the order of those, right? So, or, you know, there's little things like that they have to write around, but so who knows, you know. And I think that kind of and going back to the way it's presented, I think that the things in this movie are much more indicative, speaking of source material, I guess, of Doctor Strange type of adventures, which is weirdness, magic, evil, you know, undead, you know, that kind of stuff. That's what he fights, you know, that's how that works. But so I felt like I had to make a mental shift before even watching the movie. I said, I know Wanda's going to be evil. I don't know how evil. or I don't know if she'll be an anti-hero or a straight up villain. Turns out it's a little bit, the latter, but a lot of it. And I had to wrap my mind around and say, I'm just going to embrace the story then, even though, gosh, I really like Elizabeth Olsen's character. I like how she plays the Scarlet Witch, and I'd just love to see her be an Avenger. But I knew it was probably going to happen. So once and so that actually touches on something that I wonder, it's a complaint people have that I think that they're open to, and there's no way around it, but to acknowledge that, yeah, this is something that you gotta think about. Wanda as the grieving mother that becomes sociopathic monster killer, whatever. And how about that as like the crazy woman who's scorned or spurned, or, that's how she's going to respond to loss. There's a trope there that they're leaning into, right? That they're,
that was the one issue that I had was the, on one level, I got it in the sense that like you, it was the, okay, what are they doing and how are they doing this? And that to me, it's not really a stretch in the terms of you go through WandaVision and you see that, yeah, she's going through grief and loss. So she creates this alternate reality in which she has kids and Vision is back and all this other kind of stuff. And then that reality gets shattered when people come into the Hex. And again, you get the allies like Jimmy and Darcy and Monica, and all these things happen. And then she goes off to this place, and so you think, oh, okay, well, she's all good. And I was like, well, stop and think about it. She went through one, again, way of processing her trauma, compartmentalizing, dissociating and creating alternate things. But at the end of it, it wasn't like everything was wrapped up in a bow. If anything, it was more of the great. So that thing that I went and did to kind of put myself again in a bubble, literally, to protect myself from this stuff, that bubble got popped. And so now I'm mourning the loss of children. And then the one thing that was getting me, again, bloody social media stuff and people with the whole loss of her fake kids. And you're like, not fake kids, not fake kids. She would have gone through the process. And that the idea is that even if again, suspension of you have suspension of disbelief and all these, like, how many bajillion other ways,
right? But we can't regard this as real grief, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think
you have all this other stuff, but then you fail to recognize that was a lived, and this goes even, I would say, to the idea that it's this funny thing where we will use things like visualization. So we all know about the basketball players and the hockey players, and if you just visualize this or if you visualize that, and then people will take that off into the weird wonderful worlds of manifestations and whatnot, and pull out their The Secret and whatever else, and again, okay, we are talking about sorcery and magic users right now, so why not? So you've got all this other kind of stuff going on, but then it's like, okay, well, hold on, we all know, and we use this in our own work, where it's the idea that there are certain things where, in a sense, your brain can't tell the difference. Like when you wake up from a horrific nightmare, your brain can't tell the difference as to whether you really did that thing any more or less than you walk down the street or us doing this. So it is this thing where your brain processes certain things the same way. And there are things that we can use to our advantage with that. And again, we have no problem with visualization and what that does to help your basketball game. But when it's like, okay, hold on. Well, yeah, she constructed all of this stuff, but again, the way her brain processed it is going to be just the same. So why is it that, it's okay if this basketball player does it and it's real and I can use it to, make $1 million next week if I just visualize the 5 following things 6 times a week? But in this case, it's fake kids. And you're like, no. Neurologically, the exact same thing.
Right.
And if anything, more of a loss or more of a problem than you and your basketball, situation.
Well, you touch on, it reminds me of something that was very fundamental to my education when I first became a psych major, was that my professor of the course that turned me onto it, talking about psychosomatic disorders and saying people die from psychosomatic disorders. They're not fake. They're just psychological in nature. We use that. It's because we still don't believe in the brain. We still don't believe in mental health as body health. But to say, a psychological illness is an illness of an organ failure in the body often, which is the brain, and so that's where we experience our reality, is through our perceptual experiences. And I was one of the things that as we're talking about this, and a thought I had is how much do we want to, I don't know if we want to call it culpability. Maybe that's a little strong. We'll see how we feel about this, but the response that the world in general, but specifically as personified in Doctor Strange, has to Wanda and her pain. And we saw this in WandaVision too, where it's like, oh, we're going to just dissect your dead husband, partner, or whatever, that you know, and you're going to come in here and you're going to take him, and then we're going to lie to everyone and say that, you know, you're a bad person, and we're going to go. And then when this happens with this town, we're going to target you and try to kill you. And we're going to, you know, there's an escalating, we've got to take you down reaction to this, like, let's say grief overreaction from a pretty powerful person. So anyway, but so in Doctor Strange's response, he comes in and the very first response, your children aren't real. You know, and also then she points out that her sacrifice of having to kill the love of her life to protect the universe was immediately meaningless. And if you think about it, she didn't say this in the movie, but the reason it was meaningless was that Thanos undid what she did. And what did he use? He used the time stone. Where did he get the time stone? 15 minutes before Doctor Strange handed it to him.
Yeah.
Right. So here's the guy who gave someone the tool that undid the thing and that led to this. And also the guy who said, this is the only way, we got to go this way. And it was a way that included what she had to do and everything that happened. Right. And he's the guy who's telling her, your kids don't exist at all. What are you talking about?
And again, and I think this is as much as on one level, yeah, it's the, oh God, and this is this thing where it's like you wonder how much people read the nuances, because on one level, yes, there is the trope. Okay, she's the bad person, and that's where I still see her. She's an anti-hero in this, because if anything, what it represents is, this is why women, when they point something out and they're not listened to and heard, and then they get angry, then they're the crazy biatches kind of thing. Yeah. And that they don't get it and you're overreacting. So if anything, I mean, her response to everything, again, it doesn't make it good, wonderful, or whatever, but it's when somebody is experiencing loss and you devalue it and you diminish it and you're doing all of these things that you think are helpful, or giving somebody a dose of reality. Hey, you know what? This isn't about you and like, you know, do you have a match and a gas can? You're walking up to somebody that's already got some things flaming here, and you're coming over with the whole gasoline tanker, and you're like, just it's like a fire hose, and you're opening it, and then you're wondering, and it becomes about, and the complaints become about the person's reaction and how they're overreacting, and a failure to acknowledge what was done that caused that reaction. So it's oh, well, why are you suddenly on fire? Why are you this and that? You know, failing to acknowledge standing there with the gas hose.
Yeah.
And you don't get to stand there with the gas hose and blame the person that's on fire for the fact that they're screaming on fire, when you're the one that aimed the gas hose at them while they were holding
It's interesting. Yeah. And you know, some of these thoughts are developing now as we're talking for me, but it's interesting to see once again going to Strange's reaction, and she even calls him out on it and says, you know, you broke all the rules of time and space to get what you wanted. You know, and then when I do it, and you're a hero. When I do it, I'm a villain. And she even says that, like, that doesn't seem fair, you know, and it doesn't actually. And you see how throughout this story and this movie, and certainly, you know, well, you see it where he continues to do that. Like throughout. I mean, could you say, is there an arc where Doctor Strange learns something? And yeah, we see that in there. There's some acceptance he has to do, especially in issues with his relationship, right? But at the same time, that gets resolved, and
it's resolved because it all gets resolved. And then, oh, who does he hop into a portal with? Clea. So
exactly.
It's look at, dude still comes out, like, again, every divorced woman, oh, look at all this shit that he, pardon my French, put me through. Yeah. And then he gets to remarry this person, or, you know, next marriage, but he's left me with all this grief. So yeah, there's some tropes there, but they're not the ones that I'm sure a lot of the fanboys are going to really like.
Right. But, no, I don't think you pick up on them. And even my favorite, I'll say my favorite as far as like the cool factor is when it was the point where here's Doctor Strange reanimating a corpse from another dimension and then fighting off hell demons and then turning the undead spirits into a cloak that he then uses to fight as a zombie against it. As that happened, and that ghosts all become a big cloak around his shoulders, I turned to my daughter and I was like, this movie is fantastic. This is pretty awesome. But that's totally against all of the rules and oaths and the wizard and everything. I mean, apparently, at least that's what they say, in this. And they're like, you're animating a dead body. You're not allowed to do that. You're dream walking, which is the thing that you said is bad and that drove your altar crazy, and that, all this. And just basically, and yes, but we can look at that and say, well, it's for the greater good. He's trying to save this child. Isn't that what she's doing?
Exactly, because this is the whole thing, is that on one level it's like, oh my God, this is awesome, and yes, sometimes you do have to break the rules, and that from a problem solving perspective, he's found all the little loopholes and the gray areas. So in some respects, yes, he gets to do it, and it is, again, both visually and from a plot perspective and all these other kinds of things, wonderful. But but again, I hate to say this, it's one of those things that, again, fits in with the larger stereotypes of the world where, oh, guy breaks the rules, he's an innovator. Woman breaks the rules, insert derogatory term. And that's the part that I think was interesting about it, because in some respects it did capture that. And that, yes, she doesn't, have an aha moment, and what I think is interesting is that you watch her go through all of this. And when you think about what her motivation is, this is about, again, all the grief and the loss, the first coping mechanism that she did. Again, and I think this is sort of what parallels our own recovery. And so many times you do the thing, you think you've got it, it seems to work, and then you realize that coping tool or that thing, oh, well, it temporarily solved this problem. Mm-hmm. Oh, but manufactured 3 other ones. And now that this thing doesn't work. And what I even thought of was, the idea of what's called dysfunctional daydreaming, that we all daydream. But then there's that, okay, at what point are you, again, dissociating, escaping into daydreams, alternate realities, to the point that you're no longer engaging with life and solving the problems? And that, to me, it's like the hex in some respects kind of represents that. They talk about your, so when they talked about dream walking, it was like, okay, well, this in a sense kind of fits right in.
Yeah.
And now she's taking it to the next level. Oh, I did this in my reality. Well, hold on. Now that I know all of these other things, I can just pop into this other world, and I'll just pick up where my other person, is. And it's like, they will get it. And you're like, okay, so no, hold on, honey. Like, again, in not supporting you and having dismissed all of these different things and then letting you just go walk away, again, unsupported. Oh God, we left you to double down.
Well, there is,
here's a treatment plan. You seem to be fine. Oh, look at your EAP has run out after 8 things. Here you go. We're signing off. Call us back should you need us. Wait a minute,
we're doing
the headline.
There's an attitude. No, it's really fascinating, because there is an attitude when he says in the beginning to her, well, I'm not here to talk about what you did in the town. That's fine. It's no biggie. And it's almost like we're doing you this huge favor of saying no biggie, which, let's be honest, that was a biggie. I mean, to the people in the town, they probably weren't thrilled. So there's already, but we're not going to come and help you about this, by the way. The only people in the universe who could have any semblance of empathy that would mean anything is all the supers, all the altered people out there who could come and say, boy, we all fought in that war and we all had a great loss, and yours is one of the worst losses. No, we're just going to leave you alone somewhere in a field to, make a fake apple orchard. And once again, you could say whatever about, her openness. The one thing that becomes to where the dysfunctionality starts to come in, that probably separates this a little bit, is very much like, it's sort of like addicted thinking, compulsive thinking, unhealthy coping mechanisms, where she crosses a line at some point to where it becomes not about, I want my kids to be alive again, to it's like, well, they are. We've already found that out. They're with a loving mother, by the way, in most realities, it seems. Yeah. Her, right? Other versions of her. She does cross that line to where it's like, what I need and deserve and can get, because I have the power and ability to do it, is, I can get them, and then I will have that, right? It becomes there's an I that comes in there. But I think that goes back to the saying of, she's been told by everybody her whole life to use her powers the way they tell her to. And, it's like, you can't have this. It's like, yeah, well, I can actually. So who are you to tell me I can't? I can do this.
Well, and again, going into that idea of like, especially when you're in a bad place, and it's that whole thing about, you think about all the different kinds of thought traps people can get sucked into. So it's that all of that, you maximize all the negative, you minimize any positives. It's black and white thinking. You get into comparatives. Well, why does so-and-so have this instead of that? And so there's even the comparatives again between her and Steven. If you're going to look at it from that, why does he still, despite, having all these different women and he still gets somebody that likes him, but then they understand that, no, this isn't going to work, whatever. So it's he's still getting something and I'm getting, so you can see how she's getting into that comparative thing. And it's, well, why do all of these other versions of me get to have my kids and I don't? And so why do they? So, and again, it's that one of those things that where we know again, and we all engage in it at some point. It's again, to what degree and at what point do we intervene and go, okay, well, hold on, like this, the surefire way to dig yourself into any hole, if you're even starting off from a good, healthy place, is to get into that weird comparative thing. Because somebody else is not living, what you're seeing on their social media is not necessarily reality, it's curated. So that kind of thing. And so that's the thing, is that she gets caught up in that. And like you say, it becomes less about, her kids and making sure they're safe. It's about, I deserve to have these kids too. And that I had them for a bit and then they got taken away from me. And and all of this other kind of stuff. So like the rawness and the anger that was there was, again, because on so many levels she just kept getting dismissed, and that there really wasn't any empathy. And so again, it was everybody keeps abandoning me, I can't trust anybody else, I've just got to go do these things on my own. And then a loss of perspective, but at the same time, a very reasonable loss of perspective, because anytime there's been anybody around to reflect things back to her, I mean, literally the last support and the last, things that she had was when you had Darcy and when you had Jimmy and Monica kind of go, oh, okay, hold on. But then again, off somewhere else, and she doesn't have that anymore. So in a sense, again, gas on a fire, and she's got no other sounding boards that can reflect something back to her in a positive, supportive way. Instead, it's the dismissive, well, we're not going to talk about the past. Well, it's like, actually, no, we kind of, if we do not get to the roots of the weeds, the garden is going to get even more like, breaking off the head of the dandelion does not get rid of the dandelion crop on.
And here's another, another point towards the absence of trauma recovery and trauma therapy in superhero worlds. How I've always said, Batman is a round of EMDR away from not being Batman. The Punisher, is a prescription away from not, murdering all those criminals. And so obviously, there'd be a less interesting story to be like, here's a kid whose parents were killed who got over it, or healed from it, whatever. But on the same token, it's like, here's the consequences of untreated trauma in a way. If we want to look at it that way and say, is there a culpability with also, it's interesting, the pride that you could look at it as there's pride and narcissism, both of the sorcerers on Earth 616 or the Illuminati in the other dimension, right? Because they treat the whole thing like everybody's like, yeah, she'll try to do whatever, but we're not worried about her. We're worried about these greater philosophical arguments or these greater things over here. And it's like, and she says all the way up to when she turns completely, all right, I'm committed now, I'm going to do whatever. She says, okay, I'm going to just let loose. And I haven't done that yet, by the way, And it's like, once she does, you realize, wow, she really had not let loose her capabilities to say, I'm going to use all my capabilities against you. And it's not going to be that tough, actually. I'm going to walk. It's like walking through a wet paper bag, as far as walking through these a bunch of heroes that are very, very powerful. Right. And so she's not been taken seriously.
And again, and I think that explains, again, if we think about, how does somebody get to a certain point in their life? And we think about the overrepresentation of folks with diagnoses in, in terms of the interaction with the justice system, that are incarcerated, and that it's, again, how much of that was based on not having early responses, either, again, how many things would be addressed if we all had more stable and rich, in terms of the social determinants of health? How many things would just be prevented at that level? And then even if you can't make, the world a totally, warm, fuzzy, supportive thing, things are still going to happen, right? But that ability to take seriously and represent and support people, recognize and accept and support people earlier on. But instead you get to these things where it's like, yeah, it culminates in so and so doing the thing, and oh gee, what did they do wrong? And it's like, well, actually, if you go back, there were like how many opportunities where what was supposedly offered as support or the intervention or the whatever was, not what they needed, and was in fact the gas can. And like you say, so the culpability, in terms of us as a society. And I think that in a sense, that's what she represents in terms of, again, yes, it's being done through the idea of a mother's grief and loss, but that idea, if you keep dropping the ball and you keep whatever, one of those things, like when I was in government, one of the things we talked about was like the use of restorative justice, and especially at early stages, because one of the things we realized, especially with youth, was that the sooner you incarcerate them, all you're doing is sending them to criminal grad school. So
yeah. And you can only double down, when you double down on someone and say, boy, this is one of the issues I had when I was in a lot of court ordered treatment. And you saw a lot of people, especially with substances, where some people who had come up through their own recovery and their own sobriety tended to sometimes be very, very even cruel to say, I did it, you can do it, get it together, you piece of shit. And that whole like kick them in the ass mentality that I heard so much about when I talked to people and watched people going through it. Not that there wasn't anyone who responded to it, but 9 times out of 10, the way that I get to self-medicating in my life isn't because people haven't beat me up enough. It's usually much the opposite, right? You can only beat on someone for so long before they start to look at the world and say, well, I guess I'm in a world now where I'm either the victim or the perpetrator.
Well, and that you create the self-fulfilling prophecy. So in other words, in a sense, she didn't choose to do this. Circumstances, it's the proverbial, you create the monster, right? The larger society creates the monster by what they didn't do, how they didn't intervene. And I think she represents that. And then again, like I say, I see a gendered aspect in there as well.
Oh yeah.
Especially in terms of how it plays out relative to Stephen's. And don't get me like, this is not, I'm not trashing the movie because I love what was done here. And what I'm actually curious about, in light of how they have represented these things, that I am wondering, is this less about playing into a trope because you've just fallen into the stereotype? Or is this playing into the trope to illuminate the trope? And then what I'm kind of wondering is, will the audience get that, or is it going to be something later? If this is the playing into the trope to then kind of hit you in the face with it later, then yeah, I'm curious. I would love to think that's the thing, and that if some of the audience isn't getting it now, they'll get it later. And that's where I do think we saw it already with Loki, and we've seen it again in terms of, again, redemption arcs. Oh, we're all on for Tony's redemption arc. Again, a little bit on, maybe a little, again, the Bucky's recovery arc had its, people had some hiccups around it, but again, still played very well because again, we didn't see as much of the big bad stuff that he did. So we don't have that visceral thing. Loki though, because we were aware of all.
But we're all about.
Look at how people had a problem with that. And you're like, you had no problem with the arms dealer, guy, oh yeah, but he said he was sorry initially at the beginning first to lay that groundwork.
And he was always so rad.
Yeah, exactly. This is Robert Downey Jr., he could do no wrong. Whereas like, you're like, oh, okay, Loki, again, like we watched how people struggled with that. And
I'll be honest, I bet, I don't know the numbers, but I haven't heard enough people. I mean, everyone loves Tom Hiddleston, let's be honest, know, and, the idea of Loki being, there's a lot of people who just are pretty eager to embrace, oh, look, he's fine, whatever. I'll look past all the genocide. And that's fine. I'm probably on that list too. I'm like, yeah, redeem him, fine. I've said on this program, the accidents or the whoopsies or the mistakes or the things that people do in their moments of cruelty as a super being. Okay, that's always been this way in these stories. They destroy a planet, and it's like, well, and then they're around, and then of course it doesn't hurt that they have 80 to 100 years of storylines around most of these characters to where, at one point or another, they've all done something. So, because it's interesting to come up with a story. No, but it's you go to this idea, it's the other version of Doctor Strange. And certainly our Stephen Strange does not go this far as what we see. But would have probably pre-Endgame, so in the very beginning, here's the Doctor Strange version, Protector Strange or whatever he's called, who's traveling with America through the multiverse, trying to protect her. And here comes the monster, and he's like, I can't save you, so I've got to kill you now. I'm going to kill you and take your power to myself, which is exactly what he's supposedly protecting her from. So in that case, here's a big, strong guy who's literally going to do exactly what Wanda's about to do. And for some reason, he's okay to do it, right? Because he's not trying to get his kids back or something. Yeah. I don't know.
And I think the part that was interesting with that, and again, this is one of those where you almost, the part of me wants to do it, and then another part of me goes, okay, how many hours of my life will be lost on the big whiteboard of like story timelines? And at what point, gee, maybe did he start messing, where did he, start doing the things? Because like that's one of his things. And again, it reminds me again, like Tony, where there's that certain sense of arrogance and the intelligence that comes with it. And they do, again, creative problem solving, this kind of stuff. But what happens is that in some respects, he is trying to, again, sort out his own stuff, because his running thing is like, why is it that this relationship, like, again, he's popping into all these other different universes, and it's like and I always come out of this without something like this relationship, no matter how hard I try, no matter what universe, it's just varying degrees of not working. And how pissed off is she at me at this point? Is she merely going to give me and if she dies in a car
accident, or I don't reach out to people, or in the case of in the movie, the one guy, it seemed like all he did was he didn't reach out for help after her wedding to just get some moral support, and he destroyed the universe over it, right?
So this always goes sideways. But and again, it's that weird thing where you've got them both happening simultaneously, and again, slightly different. But what was interesting was the fact that you watch him in that last situation after having done, like I said, all of these other things that we've already listed about don't think that's in the rule book. Oh, pretty sure that's not kosher. And then it's oh no, but I don't have to steal her power. And then the idea is that you've actually been controlling this. And that was from a mentoring perspective. And from again, this is, you think about right back to the beginning, where Stephen has always been like, the arrogant, and if anything, he was going to teach anybody, it was oh, well, that cut's too large, and why did you do the stitches that way? Like, really? They let you out of medical school? Kind of like that was the sort of thing that you were going to get. Even where it was the whole, like, who did they let work on my hands? And, well, I should have done it. Well, no, actually, because you needed your hands. Maybe it was your feet. Maybe you smashed up your feet. We could have let you, freeze your feet and stitch them up yourself, but they were your hands. But so to have him actually have that moment of where you see, and again, kind of like the Peter Tony thing before, where it's no, you've actually had this. Those places that you thought you went randomly, like we went everywhere that we needed to be. It seemed random. So you actually are controlling it. You just don't know. So there's that other kind of that reinforcement of the superhero, like, so. And I think to me, that comes from, he had his own aha moment where it's I keep making these same mistakes over and over and over again. And it's that old thing about, life keeps handing you that same lesson until you stop doing it. So that's where I think, to you learn and move on. And that I think that's what happened with him. And I'm going to say, if there's a difference between him and Wanda, we get to watch him finally having that aha moment. getting off his own hamster wheel of let's keep making the same mistake in all the universes over and over again. Yeah. And even that idea too, because I mean, think about how cynical he was when he first learned about, where he could go and do all these different things. And it's like, no. It's all about science and this and that. What are you gonna be like meditating and yada, yada, yada. He gets it. He gets really cocky. He's upset by the fact that he's not the Sorcerer Supreme, but it then goes off and again, does these phenomenal things, but then has the aha moment where it's like, yeah, this was about having confidence in myself, about doing these things. And yeah, now I have confidence enough to walk away and stop beating my head into this wall. Here, America, you take your skills, you actually know what you're doing. You've been operating from a place of fear and self-doubt. Don't do that anymore. You got it. And I think that's the thing that's happened with Wanda, is that all that's happened is she is still, again, unhealed trauma, more fear and doubt. And what I'm hoping that we do see is, again, that place where, because she did have, and I think we saw the light of it in the sense of, I'm a mom, I'm not a monster. And it's oh, wait a second, that's coming out of my mouth. And now that I'm hearing it with my,
yeah.
My kids from this universe have just like freaked out. They've done this, they've done that, and I'm not the monster. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Hold on. And so that's what I think we're at.
So you're probably on the same page as me that you don't really believe she's dead.
No.
Yeah. I mean, that would be so dumb. Yeah. To actually have her be dead. And even in the comics that they're drawing from in the House of M and whatever, when she, of course, a lot more backstory for Wanda in the comics with she's usually an X-Men character. Magneto's her father. I mean, she has a whole thing, but she's found to be alive after very similar events, kind of thing later on in another storyline. But anyway, so there's a lot of things they're drawing from there. And at least we know she exists in another universe. Plus, you still got like albino Vision kicking around somewhere. And so, I think that the story of her and Vision and their super kids is not done yet. And I still hope for a redemptive arc where you're going to see that foursome together as a family again. I believe that's probably what we'll see.
And I think that's one of the things that's been nice about the fact that they've actually now tapped into the multiverse in these last two movies, and that again, and also tapping into it a little, with Loki, in that is that it gives you the opportunity to pursue different timelines and different stories and different variations. And I think we got, and again, one of those things about people's expectations in these movies is the kind of frustration or whatever. It's like, well, we got this interesting little taste. And then as soon as, she got the answer to the, is there somebody to look after your kids? You're like, oh man, they're all dead.
Yes.
All the stuff, she's going to do stuff. And now in a weird, interesting, good mom moment. Okay. So the kids will be fine. Okay. I'm cleaning house.
All right. Now you're spaghettified. Yeah.
We just got introduced to the Illuminati and all these cool versions of whatever. And their life expectancy is what? How long do you think that the battle is going to take, and what kind of scary ways?
Not as long as you'd think. And the other thing, I also thought it was great to have it was a little bit of a, not Tom Cruise in an Iron Man suit. It was Monica Rambeau as Captain Marvel, which was pretty awesome.
Brilliant.
Or wait, is it Monica or Maria? I don't remember, but I think it's Monica.
That was Monica. Maria's her mom.
Yeah.
Wait a second. Now, okay, wait a second. Now you've got me going.
Yeah. No, it was Maria. It was Maria, wasn't it? It was Maria Rambeau.
Yeah, it was Maria.
Yes. And then, okay, gotcha. So we got either. So let's get tweet at us. Or don't.
Trying to hold all of it
whatever.
in our head. Stuff's gonna fall out. Like
so to wrap, I want to before we wrap up. I one thing I was just thinking about is that you really draw a comparison to this and like, let's say the Batman, where exact same thing as you mentioned, though, in the Batman, it's drawn out, he has to confront the audience, is held by the hand and taken to a point where we have to confront that, he and the Riddler are actually doing the same thing with some of the same bad side effects. And he has to confront that. And that's not mid story. That's the end of the story, where it's like he now has to take that and move forward into the sequel and hopefully do better, is his challenge to himself, which was very, very gutsy and captured the essence of Batman in a really cool way. And then, spoiler alert for the Batman, I guess I should have said, since obviously spoilers for Doctor Strange, but but not really a spoiler. That's the theme of that movie. So with this, it's a very interesting question you bring up, which is this could be interpreted the same exact way, but are most people interpreting it that way? Nobody said that. And for me, there's a reason to be hopeful that, oh yeah, maybe it is going the way you said, and it's going to be drawn out. And we're going to see that. And then there's also a reason to not think that, which is the thing at the end where the end sort of happens and then undoes itself. There's this wonderful, weird, horror-esque cliffhanger at the very end where, you got, hey, everything's worked out and I'm walking down the street and then, oh my gosh, third eye. And the third eye was the sign of corruption that was in the other Doctor Strange. And he it kneels over in pain and you're like, oh no, something's wrong. He's cursed. He's brought this on himself by his rule breaking. There's consequences, as Mordo always said. And then, so that's my reason to be hopeful that maybe they'll take it that way. Then again, the end credit scene immediately shows him once again, chillily walking down the street. And here's Cleo who bursts through and is like, hey, it's ride or die time. You're going to come with me and do something crazy. And his third eye opens up just casually. And he's like, I'm in. Yeah. And it's like fun times or whatever. And it's like adventure time. And so I kind of am like, well, which way are we going to go with that? Are we going to draw out the fact that, dude, you essentially did the same thing as Wanda. You were saving kids. She was trying to say that, she went too far this way. You went too far this way. There consequences for going too far, even if it was for a good cause. Or is it just going to be like, hey, he's got a third eye now, that's dope?
Yeah, well, I'm curious to see what they do. And I can't imagine there being something without some sort of consequence, because I think it would be, well, and again, and this is where all of these stories go in terms of the superpowers, because and why these stories are so rich is because, again, it's the whoopsies, it's the whatever, it's the, oh, wait a second, it doesn't matter how well-intentioned you were. And again, even just thinking about that dynamic that exists, you talked about with, again, in terms of Stephen and Wanda, where it's the, great, you did this thing for the greater good to undo the blip, but look what this did to me kind of thing. And look what it, the implication. So it's it's all of these things where, and I would say it's, again, perfect metaphor for things in mental health. It's not about your intention, it's about the impact. And we all know about the road to hell being paved with good intentions, and that we've all encountered situations where, I get what you think you're doing, and it's wonderful that you're well-intentioned, but did you not think about this? And so I think that's the other part of it, is what they introduced was the possibility of, again, here are two different ways. Which path are we going to go down first? Or is one just the nod and and is one the path? What is it? But that idea of, again, intentions, and that being what, people get caught up in, as opposed to what's the impact of your actions, which is the more important part of it, because it doesn't matter how well-intentioned you are. If something goes sideways and you don't take ownership for it,
right,
then what does that mean? And especially, again, when I think about it through the mental health perspective, I don't care how well-intentioned, a clinician is, if they're not aware of their impact and take ownership of, okay, I did this thing and I realized, oh, okay, in light, I did not know that, for all the different things we've discussed, this whole process has now just illuminated a new place of trauma. And that as much as I operate from a trauma-informed perspective, I inadvertently triggered you on this. And now there's a whole area. And take that ownership of, okay, so we cracked this whole thing open. It was done in a really awkward, painful way. Now I'm going to take ownership of that. And now I'm going to help you move through that too. And those kinds of things, like that's, so to me, that's both a human thing, how do we support those of us with diagnoses? And then how do we as professionals, accept the fact that we have a certain knowledge base, we might have certain lived experience, but that doesn't mean we're not going to stick our foot in it. And there isn't going to be, we all have to go through life, yes, with good intentions, but with the humbleness and the groundedness to accept that you're going to stick your foot in it. And when you do, don't get caught up in what your intentions were. Get caught up in what you stuck your foot in and what the impact was, and go there.
It's a really good point.
Lead with your intentions. Then, and I think that's what happened with Wanda. Everybody was leading with what their intentions were and failing to recognize the impact. And that, again, that's salt in the wounds. That's adding insult to injury. That's, again, going from the gas can to the gas tank.
It's flying too close to the sun and thinking that was the right thing to do because it worked, in a way, right? That's what we're kind of what we're saying. If we can put it in the terms of the Doctor Strange or any of the other, you look at how many times in these stories does someone do something that, wow, Strange, you're doing things that is going to suppose that, well, I guess there is that line in the end credit scene where she says, you've caused an incursion, you got to fix it. So I guess that is there. That just popped in my memory, because it's like, yeah, you've hopped dimensions, you've dream walked, you've done all these things that break these rules. And the point Mordo makes in number 1, where he says, the Ancient One did the same thing and it's caused consequences. She created Mads Mikkelsen, not the guy. We'd be grateful for that, I guess, because he's in every movie now. But the villain played by him. So, it is interesting to see that. And I know that one of the storylines, especially any real nerd will tell you that one of the ongoing conflicts in superhero stories and comics and movies is that the existence of the hero requires the existence of the villain, not just in the narrative of storytelling, but in those worlds of, the bad ups its ante along with the good. Batman starts fighting crime, and then that creates the Joker, a need for the Joker to exist.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing too, that you're mentioning about Batman. We'll go down a different rabbit hole with that one another time. But yeah, exactly. Like this idea that, we're doing a thing, doing it all for the right reason. Oh, that's not what I thought was going to happen. And how soon does it get dealt with, or what, are the consequences immediate, or are they more long-term? And I think we're more used to, and we talked about this before a lot of times, especially with Spider-Man, a lot of times those consequences are immediate. Oops. The Staten Island Ferry is now in 2 parts. I went from the woohoo, I rocked it, to OMG. Oh God. Okay. They're
biffed it big time.
Dad to pull my butt out of the fire and then give me a talking to.
So we've now laid teasers for a few other things we're going to have in other episodes. People will see either it's Batman or redemptive arcs or different tones and themes with superheroes. But let's make sure before we go, tell everybody what you're up to. Tell everybody what is going on with Speak Up and just other things that they can find that you're doing.
I know before we've always gone down the rabbit hole of trying to remember all of my handles and whatever. So if the work that I do is about taking this kind of stuff, especially fandom and Marvel related stuff, and using it as a filter and a framework like we've been doing here to help people better understand mental health and neurodivergence diagnoses, lived experiences, and how we can better support each other, learn more, and address these things from an empowering perspective rather than these, again, negative, stereotypical things that we tend to be surrounded by. So www.speak-up.co is my website, and that'll have all the social media handles, so we don't have to go to that rabbit hole. And I also work in the world of BTS, Bangtan Soyeon, and use their music and videos to do the same thing because of, again, the positive reinforcement and the fact that they model a variety of different therapeutic techniques and peer support, and again, take a positive and empowering perspective on lived experience. So no, a lot of it's just been about updating some stuff. Thanks to Moon Knight, I am now going to be adding Disassociative Identity in there, because I think and we talk about in another episode of how well it reflects it, helps us understand it. And again, knowing folks with that diagnosis, how, again, it gives some, again, while cinematic, some authentic insight. So no, that's what I'm up to. Sort of the same old, doing some vast coaching for some different organizations where it's all about their employees that have come together under, again, the shared diagnosis, again, in variable forms of variable attention stimulus trait. ADHD is what most folks call it, and doing coaching for them so that they can access that superpower in the different parts of their organization to their individual benefit, as well as that for their team.
Does a lot of good for a lot of people. I firsthand, as I've adopted a lot of your principles and shared it with people, I can see how much of a difference it's made to them too. So
that's awesome.
Wonderful.
Good to know.
I'm gonna you know what? What I'm gonna do is I'll take that little last bit and I'm gonna kind of paste that on both so that there's an ending cap that tells
Yeah.
people where to find you on both.
Cool, cool,
So
cool.
yeah, awesome. Well, good. I gotta jump to a client
Yeah.
and stuff. But thanks so much. I'll send some more times and we'll do let's plan on that one. I'll look into the Venom thing a little bit and
Yeah.
we should probably
Oh,
talk
and like I
about
said,
Batman
the
too.
Batman would be
Yeah.
nice because again, like, I mean, we've talked about this before, there's so many things that I love about DC, but I always feel like it's like, oh my God, here's the unhealed trauma people, just,
Yes, exactly.
And
And-
again, not claiming that Marvel's perfect, but they at least address it differently and we're not just people watching people wallow in their pain.
exactly. Well, I mean, I do if you want to. I mean, I've got a similar opening Monday next week if you want to do Monday again. If you want to do it that soon.
I think that should work. Hold on, let me call up my calendar. My desktop, like my brain, too many tabs open at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd probably have to be like 1:30 your time. But
yeah, no, 1:30 would work. That would be
okay.
perfect.
Yeah, we'll do that. That'll be fun. Awesome.
Awesome. Okay, I will let
Thanks,
you get
Sharon.
going. Thank you for another great afternoon. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.